There is a moment when everything you thought you knew about your life begins to shift beneath your feet. Mine came on a Thursday afternoon at a small café at the edge of town, with the Oregon sky hanging low and gray outside the window, and my son sitting across from me with a rehearsed smile and borrowed concern. A woman I had never seen before appeared beside my table without a word of greeting. She placed a thin manila envelope in front of me, and when her eyes locked onto mine, I felt it. That cold, precise certainty that something important was about to change. "You will need this tonight," she whispered. "Whatever you do, do not open it here." Before I could speak, she was gone. I was 67 years old. I had buried my husband. I had survived a grief so heavy it had altered the shape of every quiet room I walked into. I was not supposed to be afraid of anything anymore, but I was. And what I discovered that night would force me to choose between protecting my family and protecting the truth my husband had died to preserve. My name is Olivia. I had lived on our land in rural Oregon for 41 years.
My husband and I had built a life there, not just a house, but an inheritance of seasons, of mornings over coffee watching the mist lift from the north field, of evenings when the forest pressed close and the silence felt like company rather than loneliness. When he died, the official story was an accident, a car that went off the road in poor weather, a tragedy, nothing more. I believed it because I had no reason not to. That is the cruelest part of betrayal. It does not announce itself. It waits. Our son Lucas had grown distant in the months since the funeral. He visited more often, yes, but differently. He moved through my house with a new kind of attention, his eyes lingering on doorways and storage rooms, his conversations always circling back to the same subject: the land, the taxes, the burden, the suggestion, always gentle, always rehearsed, that I might consider selling. His wife Marisa was sharper about it. She never wasted time on sentiment. Over tea in that very café, she had told me that a woman my age had no business managing acreage alone, that grief was clouding my judgment.
That the responsible thing, the loving thing, would be to let them help me find something smaller, somewhere easier. Have you ever sat across from someone who is speaking the language of care, but whose eyes are counting what you own? I had lived long enough to recognize the difference between worry and calculation. I simply had not expected to see it in my own family. That was the Thursday the envelope arrived. I waited until after dark to open it. Inside was a small brass key and a strip of notebook paper with 2 lines written in a careful, deliberate hand. A phone number, a time, 11:32 at night, and an instruction: answer, do not call back. At exactly 11:32, my phone rang, from a number that left no trace in my call log. The voice on the other end was distorted, filtered through something electronic, but the cadence, the rhythm, the particular way it shaped my name, I had heard that voice for over 40 years. It was my husband. I know what you are thinking. I thought the same thing, but I did not hang up, because the voice said something no one else could have known to say. It told me the truth was buried under my feet. It told me not to trust Lucas. It told me not to trust the local police, and it told me that my husband had not died the way they said. The line cut out before it could say more. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, watching the light change, understanding for the first time that whatever had killed my husband was not finished. The next morning, before Lucas arrived unannounced, I went into my husband's office, a room I had avoided for months because grief lived there. What I found was something else entirely. He had left me a trail. Folders repositioned, not removed. Bank records showing careful, deliberate cash withdrawals, always below the threshold that would raise questions, always ending 2 weeks before his death. A sealed letter with my name on it that read, "If you are reading this, I could not stop it the way I hoped. The truth is buried. Silence was the only thing that kept you alive." And then, on his computer, using the address of the very first property he ever owned as the password, I found archived emails to a criminal defense attorney in another state, photographs taken at night, tire tracks near the slope of land he had always told me to stay away from. Equipment moved in darkness, and a tunnel, older than the house itself, running beneath our property into natural rock chambers that had never been mapped. Lucas had found it years before his father. He had recognized its value immediately. Isolated, private, protected by the assumption that family land stays within family. He had used it for illegal storage, for transfers, for shipments that moved quietly and disappeared just as fast. When my husband discovered what was happening beneath his own feet, he confronted his son. Lucas promised to stop. That promise lasted exactly as long as it needed to, which was not very long at all. What happened next was not an accident. A man named Grant Mercer, someone my husband had trusted when he ran out of options, told me everything in a second phone call. He had been watching me since my husband died. He had been waiting until I was ready to see the truth. My husband's car had been forced off the road. Grant had been following at a distance. He could not get there in time. The night they came to remove me, Lucas arrived just after midnight with a deputy in tow, and Marissa standing rigid at the portrail. They called it a welfare check. They used words like distress and confusion and protection. What they were doing was clearing the last obstacle between themselves and everything my husband had left behind. I did not argue with them. I ran. I crossed the yard in the freezing dark, moving low and fast toward the tree line. I knew that land the way I knew my own hands. I reached the clearing near the old slope, dropped to my knees, and dug into the cold earth with my bare fingers until I struck something solid. A sealed container, heavy, waiting. Lucas chased me through the woods. When his flashlight caught my face, I saw something I will never forget. He was not angry. He was terrified, because he already knew that if that container reached the wrong hands, everything was over. A car was waiting at the edge of the service road. The woman driving was Claire Donovan, a woman who had worked alongside my husband during the last year of his life. Off the record, in secret. She had been part of the plan from the beginning. We drove until the farm disappeared behind us. Then she told me to open the container. Inside were flash drives, a notebook wrapped in oilcloth, and a letter in my husband's handwriting that began, "My dearest Olivia, if you are holding this, then I failed to stop them. I am so sorry, but you were always stronger than you believed." He had documented everything: names, dates, payment records, proof that Lucas and Marissa had coordinated it all. He had also established a legal trust in my name months before his death, with funds set aside and safeguards that triggered the moment anyone attempted to force me off the property. He thought of everything, even his own ending. We set a simple trap. I sent a message from my phone. "I will return what I took. Meet at the house tonight. Come alone." They did not come alone. They never intended to. But this time, the house was full of people they had not planned for, federal agents who had been briefed, prepared, and waiting. When Lucas stood in my kitchen and said the words I needed to hear, that it was supposed to scare him, that it was not meant to go that far, it was already over. The lights came on, the doors opened, and the arrogance that had made them believe they were untouchable walked them directly into handcuffs. Marissa received the longer list of charges. The deputy resigned before the indictment reached his desk. Lucas was charged, tried, and convicted. He did not fight it. I think somewhere beneath the calculation and the greed, he had always known the day would come. I visited him once, months later. He could not look at me at first. When he finally did, I told him the truth. Not to wound him, but because it was the only thing I had left to give. "Your father loved you until the end," I said. "And because of that love, he trusted me with what you could not be trusted with." I walked out of that prison and I did not look back. The land is still mine. The tunnels are sealed and documented. Part of the property is now leased to a young couple committed to sustainable farming. The rest I walk myself, at sunrise, when the light comes slow across the north field, and the birds have returned to places that once felt watched. What I know now, after all of it, is something I wish I had understood earlier.
Strength does not announce itself. It does not ask permission. At 67, running through a dark forest with broken fingernails and a container full of evidence pressed to my chest, I was the most powerful I had ever been.
Not because I was fearless, but because I refused to let fear make the decision for me. Justice after 50 is not a fantasy. It is a choice you make, sometimes in the dark, sometimes alone, sometimes with hands shaking and lungs burning. Legal revenge is not about cruelty. It is about refusing to disappear. Starting over does not always mean leaving. Sometimes it means standing exactly where you are and making them move instead. The most dangerous betrayal is not the one that comes from strangers. It is the one that grows quietly inside the people you fed and sheltered and loved without condition. Silence may feel like safety. Truth is what keeps you alive. And no matter how long the darkness lasts, the morning always comes back to those who wait it out.